Hi, and thank you for tuning into Noir Histoire. I'm Natasha, and in this episode, I'll be discussing Hollywood Shuffle. Hollywood Shuffle is a 1987 satirical film directed by Robert Townsend that uses comedy to provide commentary on the stereotypical roles and portrayals of Black people in film and television. Bobby Taylor, played by Townsend, is an aspiring actor living with his family and working at a hot dog stand while hoping for his big break. He goes through the process of auditioning for the lead role in Jive Time Jimmy's Revenge, excited about the idea of becoming a big star and the money and changes it will bring for his family. But the experience also exposes him to the industry's prejudiced beliefs about Black people and leads to questions about his morals and integrity. When I started watching Hollywood Shuffle, just within the first 10 minutes where Bobby Taylor goes off in this audition, the film opens with him in the bathroom with his younger brother going over lines rehearsing for this audition. And the dialogue was just absolutely ridiculous, as is the tone and speech patterns that he uses, because this is the kind of nonsense that you see in films, especially with this movie having been released in the 80s. This would have been not that long after the blaxploitation movies of the 70s. I've watched some of those movies, and I've considered reviewing them, but when you look at them now, most of them are not very well made. Typically, the characters are extremely stereotypical, the dialogue is ridiculous, and there's nothing there for you to really review and discuss. Watching the opening scenes of this movie, where he's rehearsing for this audition, I saw that and I laughed to myself because it was I completely get this. It offers a lot of commentary on the reality of the types of roles made available for Black people, that it's hard, especially at that time, to get a role in a movie or TV show because there's a limited amount. And then it's the limited roles that are available, here's what you have to choose from. And then going even deeper into it, Bobby heads to the actual audition. There's a line of Black males and females of various shades and sizes waiting for their chance to audition for these incredibly ridiculous roles. They then appear before the casting directors, and the direction notes that they're given as far as how to present these characters just becomes increasingly insane. I remember recently having a conversation with someone, and we were discussing being witty and having a sense of humor. To be clear, not goofy, but being witty can be a mark of intelligence, because here you have this comedy, but it's showing the ridiculousness of these situations by exaggerating them. But within that, it offers a lot of commentary about the movie and television industries and Black people's role within them. You have Bobby starting out in the bathroom rehearsing for this audition. You then have him at the audition where there are multiple Black people rehearsing on their own or with a partner, which just pushes things over the top. It's so ridiculous but funny at the same time, and also uncomfortably realistic. It in some sense reminded me of watching TV shows like Insecure and the Netflix version of Dear White People, where in the midst of the show, the characters would be watching unbelievable TV shows with ridiculous commercials. And quite often, especially within Dear White People, it would be based on a real TV show. Here you have these TV shows within the show, and the first one, it's a bat from Detroit living with a white family. The bat is a guy in a bad costume. It sounds stupid, but also something that someone might have pitched as a sitcom idea. Then various actors from the casting call in auditions where they're now appearing in this television ad for Hollywood's first Black acting school. Just further nonsense. You have a slave and a butler, but then they're white acting coaches teaching Black people how to appear authentically Black on film. One coach is teaching Black people how to perfect their walk and how to properly speak jive. On its own, the scene is sharp and witty, but then I remembered Robert Townsend mentioned this in They've Gotta Have Us, where he saw this kind of stuff when he was starting out in the industry as an actor. Being a Black person going on these auditions where he'd be reading for a Black role, and here's this casting director who's most likely white telling you as a Black person how Black people sound. Just imagine how ridiculous that is. Oh, let me show you how to walk as a Black person. Let me show you how to speak like a Black person. It'd be ridiculous enough if another Black person was attempting to teach me how to walk and talk like a Black person. But it's made even more ridiculous by a white person teaching Black actors under the guise of this being an acting school. So one of the guys is showcased as a successful graduate of the school. He went through the training course, and just a year later, he's played multiple criminals, pimps, rapists, etc. You laugh because it's a silly idea, but then the reality that this truly takes place, it gives you pause. Bobby continues on through the audition process, but in the meantime, he's still working this job at a fast food restaurant that he doesn't like. He lives at home with his mom, grandmother, and younger brother. He has a really great relationship with his younger brother who looks up to him. He's very passionate about acting as it's what he wants to do. He's part of the movie. He's appeared on TV. This role is something that he's been working towards for quite some time, and he's made some sacrifices to go after his dreams. Bobby has an uncle who in the past was a singer, but his dreams didn't really work out as he let other people talk him out of pursuing this passion. And now he's settled down and has a wife, kids, and responsibilities, so he no longer has the freedom to pursue his dreams. Having had that experience, he encourages Bobby to go after his dreams and not let anyone dissuade him or talk him out of pursuing what he's passionate about. But the guys down at the hot dog stand where Bobby works, they kind of discourage him from continuing to pursue his acting career. They work at the hot dog stand and have different job titles and responsibilities. Nobody should ever feel ashamed of working an honest job, but because they're content with their jobs, they talk down on Bobby's dreams of wanting more. That's something that I think a lot of people can relate to. People have different dreams and value things differently. What it means to make it or to be successful varies from person to person. So whereas for one person, having a stable 9-to-5 job, comfortable home, nice car, partner, and or kids, or whatever combination of those things is living the life for them. For some people, whether or not they like their job isn't important as long as it's paying, and all of that is fine. But then at the same time, you have other people where that's just not enough for them. They want more out of life. It might be that they want to travel the world, or they want to create in whatever form that might take. It might be a particular profession or creative calling or something involved in entrepreneurship. The fact is that we all have our own paths in life. So his grandmother and mother are encouraging. They support him going after this dream. The only thing is that, when his grandmother realizes the kind of role that he's auditioning for, that he'll be playing, she's a bit disappointed. It's not that she doesn't want him to make it, but rather that she's not happy about him portraying these kinds of characters. That's another thing that's discussed here. Where as he goes through the audition process, the casting directors end up liking him, and he's successful in landing this part, which could potentially be a big break for him and lead to great things. But he has to then weigh those opportunities against the character who's just a walking stereotype, right? Filming this stupid script, the dialogue and the things that occur in the scenes that they shoot are complete nonsense. But it really does ask this question, which is twofold. On the one hand, within the industry, you have these incredibly limited roles of Black people. And at this point in time, you had such a relatively small amount of films, TV shows, and other projects being centered around Black people or featuring Black people. There was scarcity just in terms of the number of roles, as projects didn't frequently come along. Black creators would have to make decisions as far as what types of roles they were willing to play. If your aim is working and there are limited roles, and these are primarily the kinds of roles available, do you stand on principle and refuse to play these roles, bearing in mind that you might potentially have to go without work? Or do you compromise and overlook your principles for the shot to make it big, or really just for an opportunity to work? I can't really call it one way or another. I certainly understand both sides of the equation. While this is a satirical film, this is a pretty poignant question that it asks. Is it more important for you to work or for you to do good work? I think it's easy enough to say for you to do good work. As you see here, he's living at home with his mom, so, that relieves some pressure. But let's say that he was out on his own as a young actor in Hollywood from some other part of the country without his family to serve as a safety net. If there are a few roles out there for you, and of the few roles available for which you'd be considered they're stereotypical, the roles are terrible parts that portray Black people in a negative light, but you need to keep a roof over your head and food in your belly, you're going to have to make a sacrifice somewhere, and the question is where. The film approaches this discussion through comedy, but actually touches on some really good points. Overall, Hollywood Shuffle is a pretty short film, clocking in at just about 1 hour and 20 minutes. And in dealing with the film, I obviously knew that Robert Townsend was in it, but this was my first time watching it. I was surprised to see the amount of other Black comedic actors and actresses that appear in the film. There are quite a number of the Wayans siblings, mostly the older ones. A number of them that would go on to be on In Living Color. So here you have Keenen Ivory Wayans, Damon Wayans, Kim Wayans. There are also quite a few other actors and actresses, some of whom I might not know by name, but recognize their faces and have seen them in other things, especially during the 90s. It's pretty cool that at that point in time, Townsend was able to get all of these people together with a relatively small budget. But then again, I think that's because I'm viewing it from the present, where many of these actors went on to do incredible things in the film and television industry. But back then, a lot of them were really just starting out. In Living Color was several years away. And if I'm not mistaken, the Eddie Murphy skit in Hollywood Shuffle paved the way to Robert Townsend then directing Raw for Eddie Murphy. So a lot of these actors and actresses were either at the start of their career or like they just hadn't blown up as yet. I believe that this was Robert Townsend's first film and it was independent, something that he put together. And at that time, I guess because everyone else was looking for work and trying to get their names out there, in part by supporting each other, he was able to get so many of these other people that would go on to become legends in their own right to like appear in this project. As a kid, I wasn't allowed to stay up to watch the Arsenio Hall show, but I remember like being a kid growing up in the 90s and seeing clips from the show where many of these Black celebrities would be guests, seeing the Wayans talking about In Living Color around the time it blew up, like just before it came out. I remember seeing an episode where Martin Lawrence was on the Arsenio Hall show and he was there to promote Martin, which was about to premiere. But he was talking about like how Eddie and Arsenio did Coming to America, and he was explaining the premise for Martin, the sitcom, and how it was going to be a show where he would play a lot of different characters, and he described Shanae. That went on to become what I consider a legendary sitcom, but to see him pitching it, to see him joking about being early on in his career when Eddie Murphy was the man, appearing in movies with him, or, you know, them hanging out, going over to Eddie Murphy's house, and his girl wanted to leave him to stay at Eddie's house. So I wasn't an adult then, I wasn't even a teen, but I saw enough clips from this adult show that I never got to see live, and seeing many of these people here made me feel really nostalgic. You look at this project and within a few years, many of these people would have begun putting out their legendary projects. At that point, you wouldn't have been able to get them all together for a film like this. In some ways, it reminded me of another film that I loved as a kid, I'm Gonna Get You Sucker. So funny films that also had moments of social commentary. To think of it, there are actually quite a few of these satirical comedies from like the late 80s to early 90s. They poke fun at these common tropes that are found in a lot of stereotypical Black movies. But in the case of Hollywood Shuffle, it combines that commentary and those criticisms in a very sharp and witty way. It's not a lecture, but rather on-point satire, using comedy to make some very poignant points and astute observations. Overall, I think this is an incredible movie, relatively short and very enjoyable, but I recommend you check it out. I've seemingly always been aware of the Wayans brothers, Robert Townsend, Martin Lawrence, Eddie Murphy, those kinds of people that came about in the 80s into like the 90s. I wasn't around when they first popped up on the scene, but because they'd been around before I was even born, really, where it's like they were just kind of that group of celebrities from that era, like in the 90s, that were just around when I was a kid. So they've just always been in my periphery. I remember some of Robert Townsend's projects from like the 90s, not so much the 80s. I don't know that I sought them out then, but somehow in the years since, I've like seen them, or I've at least become aware of them. I remember The Parenthood, which was a television show where he played a TV dad. I think it was Meteor Man with the gray costume. He was in the 5 Heartbeats. Different projects, right? But I don't know that I actually saw any of his earlier work. I mostly remember The Parenthood, and it was an okay show. Like, I remember the characters and things like that, but I don't remember it being like one of my favorites. It was one of those shows I would watch on TV because there was nothing else to watch. I don't really know where I got the perception of him from. It might have been based on that show and the character, but I kind of thought of him to be a bit of a cornball, to be quite honest. It wasn't until I was recently watching They've Gotta Have Us, and then in searching for movies and stuff like that to review, it kind of changed my perspective. I'd seen pictures and clips even from Hollywood Shuffle, but I'm pretty sure that I've never actually seen the movie, or I hadn't seen the movie. The perception that I had of him was based on this TV show and maybe like clips from a few other things. So through that, I've formed like these preconceived notions based on the limited input that I had. But looking for something to review, I decided that at some point I was going to review Hollywood Shuffle. It's been on my list for a while, but you know, other things kind of ended up taking precedence until I was watching They've Gotta Have Us and saw more detailed clips of the film and him explaining the inspiration. I felt it was especially fitting movie to review because it's parody and satire about Black people and their role in the film industry. I watch a lot of movies, but sometimes struggle to find films to review, in part because I try to switch back and forth between fiction from different genres and nonfiction documentaries, along the lines of what I do with the book reviews. The problem with films is that in more recent years, there have been lots of movies with predominantly Black casts or following Black characters, but I try to review things that are more than just entertaining. I seek out films where there's room for analysis so we can have a deeper discussion, like have conversations beyond, I like this scene or I liked when that happened, so that if there's not social commentary, then there's at least something there to dig into. But sometimes it's a struggle. Because while in recent years, I think especially if you look at maybe, let's say within the last decade or two, in comparison to the 40s or 50s, or even beyond that, there's certainly a greater quantity of Black movies, but the quality isn't always there. Even with television shows and like the rise of Netflix, Showtime, Starz, streaming platforms where you have so many more outlets and thereby more opportunities for Black people to produce projects and whatnot, or to be made about Black people, the quality isn't always there, with HBO maybe being the exception. And so you see this reflected in the general market as well, where it's like there's a lot more projects out there across the board, but not all of it's good. Sometimes it can be a bit of a struggle to seek out projects where the production quality is good as well as the story and the acting. Generally speaking, I kind of stay away from like straight to DVD films and those kinds of projects because the stories tend to be ridiculous. It's often some like thrown together mess. And I want to review good projects. So through that lens, it's difficult enough for projects with predominantly Black cast to get made, but then the pool of things to choose from shrinks as you add criteria of having the movie actually be good, having the story be good, having the characters be interesting and hopefully not stereotypical, and then having the acting be good. You add those parameters and it limits your options across the board. But I think especially with regards to Black films, just because there aren't as many made. I know that Tyler Perry is someone that's been pointed out as like a great example of Black success in film and TV, but while I applaud and champion him for what he's done as an entrepreneur in building his company, creating opportunities through these different projects, I do also agree with the criticisms of the quality of his work. Like, I think they're valid. I remember when, it's probably at least like 10 years or so now, I would go to Walmart, and at that point, he hadn't really started producing films just yet. It was more like the Medea type projects on DVD, like the plays. You could pick them up at Walmart, pretty inexpensive. I remember my family and I would watch those. Because they were kind of limited in quantity at the time, it's like a handful of them. It felt like there was enough of a difference between them for you to pick them up and enjoy them. Something to watch on like a Friday or Saturday night, just hanging out with the family. But in the years since, where it's like, you have more projects, and sure, the Medea thing, I think, is like his franchise show, or it's been the star of his franchise. So there's been more of those films, but he's also branched out into other properties, projects and whatnot, especially with regards to television. But past a certain point, like, I just couldn't rock with it anymore. I'm not like an incredibly serious person, and I don't think every film or TV show that comes out about Black people, like they have to be paragons of virtue or upstanding citizens. Like, I like crime shows, I like nonfiction, I like true crime, I like the Power series, I like Book 3, Raising Kanan. I watch dramas and things where the characters really aren't the best examples of humanity, and I'm fine with that, so that's not the issue. But I do like for the projects that I watch to be good. And so in thinking about these kinds of things, as I look more closely at film, where it's like, I watch more movies than I review here, right? I watch them from the perspective of just looking to be entertained. But for the things I review for this channel, I try to dig a bit more deeply and find things where the production quality is actually pretty good. The work that's presented is good, meaning that it doesn't look thrown together, and the acting is good as well as the story. And so in recent years, when I look through a lot of stuff, a lot of it is not very good. And I have conversations with people, be that family members, co-workers, acquaintances, and we talk about what we're watching. And it's like, some of the shows we watch overlap, but it's like, I refuse to watch bad TV. I refuse to watch movies that are not good. Even if it's made and produced by a Black person, I refuse to watch it if the quality isn't good. And so with that, when I saw like the clips of Hollywood Shuffle, and there was discussion of the clips, they spoke about the parody and satire about like stereotypes that you see throughout Black film. It was mentioned that this repetitiveness of these character types, a lot of Black people, Black men especially, because I think that's what the film kind of focuses on. Black female representation is still limited within Black film, but that's something we can discuss at a later date. But when you look at it, the typical roles of Black males, it's like thugs, criminals. In the past, it was butlers, servants, pimps. In the present, it's expanded a little bit more, but it's you kind of have like this equivalent for Black female characters. Last year, around the time that I watched the Tina documentary, I also read her second book, My Love Story. And in it, she spoke about having this rebirth in her career later on in life as a solo artist, wanting to also do like movies. So she did Mad Max. People approached her about other films, but her film career didn't really take off because the roles that she was being approached about were very limited. Everything was like, playing a prostitute, a maid, or something along those lines, and she didn't want those kinds of roles. And so it's like you have this thing of, while the rest of the film industry continues to expand, there continues to be severe limitations placed on the types of characters, the types of ways in which Black people are represented on TV or in movies. We've seen some progress, but it's nowhere near where it should be. I don't have a problem with Black people playing bad guys, being villains. It's less about only wanting positive characters and positive role models, and more about wanting variety in the presentation of Black people in TV and in movies. I don't buy into the idea of respectability politics, that if you negatively portray Black people in film and TV, that then affects how we're viewed and perceived in the real world. The reality is that the people that would watch movies or TV shows and see characters who happen to be Black and thereby apply those characteristics to real life Black people, odds are they're probably going to be racist and prejudiced anyway. I would think that as adults watching, you can differentiate between white people carrying on in movies and TV shows and white people in real life. So I don't buy into the idea that Black people should only take positive roles or only portray respectable citizens. Like, everyone doesn't have to be the Huxtables. I'm perfectly fine with you portraying characters that aren't like the best people, but with the caveat that it's balanced with stories about everyday people as well. I don't have a problem with you creating projects where Black people are poor, or they're struggling with drug addiction, or they're like raging alcoholics, or even running a criminal enterprise, as long as that's balanced with Black people being shown as successful professionals, regular family people. And if you're going to have a film where it's like, some guy or some lady carrying on and sleeping around with a bunch of different people and all the drama that creates, fine. I think you have to also balance that with like romantic comedies or just regular boy meets girls films that show Black people in healthy, loving relationships, just being regular people. I don't have a problem with people portraying less than stellar characters, people who have questionable morals, as long as you balance with like the feel-good positive stuff as well. Don't make it like there's 100 Black characters on TV and in the movies that like 95 of them are criminals, drug addicts, deadbeat parents. Strike a balance by having some variety. Thanks for tuning in. Show notes are available on the Noir Histoire website via the link in the episode description. If you enjoyed this episode and want more movie recommendations, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and check out my movie review playlist.